And that, Sophia, to me, as your friend and someone who admires you, is something that is a great pivot point. Because while you were once liberated, you've spent your lifetime liberating us and our Western New York community from the ties that interfere with our common human family. You're a liberator, you're a survivor. We're so thrilled that you could join us here today. And for full disclosure, she has 3 lawyer sons. She knows the power of your work and the power of the decisions that you make every day.
And don't mess with it.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Sophia, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all the way in the way?
Yes.
First, I have to make a confession. I'm a little bit nervous, to say the least, because I never had an audience before with so many lawyers and judges, and I know it is your profession to judge people. So be very kind with me, you know, when you judge me. So I'm a little bit nervous. Then I had a whole thing prepared as an introduction to my question. I always have to question, how could this have happened in Germany, the most civilized, cultural country in the world, with the best universities, the best scientists, the best philosophers, you name it, the best of everything. How could it have happened in Germany? Now, they not only killed 6 million Jews, they also killed 5 million other people altogether, like black people, homosexuals, communists, gypsies, you name it. They killed 11 million people, civilians, not soldiers, in about 7.5 years' time. Think about that, 11 million people in about 7.5 years' time in one of the most sophisticated, best societies in the world. Could it ever happen here or any other country? That is not a funny question. Could it ever happen somewhere else? And that is one of the reasons, because I really don't know the question or the answer to my own question. I talk in a lot of schools, universities, and theaters, and churches, and I can see especially the faces of the students in high school. I come in and they think, oh my God, what is that old woman going to talk about? And we have to sit here for an hour, right?
Yeah.
And I tell them, listen, I really don't want to be here because I have a very busy life. I have other things to do that I enjoy, but it is my duty to be here because we have to learn about the lessons of the Holocaust. You are our global citizens. The neighborhood is not Kenmore anymore or downtown Buffalo. The world is your community, and that is why I'm here, because we have to learn the lessons from the Holocaust. And I started talking about 20-25 years ago. I was being told that they really don't appreciate the way I talk. Even the museum in Washington told the HRC Center that I really don't talk the right way, because years and years and years ago, the Holocaust was considered a unique experience, a unique event into history. And that is not true. And I always said that is not true. It happened thousands of years ago. We still have Passover, and we talk about that period 3,000 years ago, and we still have it right now. The only unique thing about the Holocaust, the only unique thing is the way in which they killed the people. We were being killed in an industrial way, literally speaking. They could kill 6,000 Jews in one day in Auschwitz. That was the uniqueness about the Holocaust. And it is still happening. So when they opened the gates of the concentration camps, we all thought, well, once they see what happened inside the camps, we never have to talk about it anymore. The whole world will know, and we will live in a very peaceful world. It did not turn out like that. We still have a lot of hate crimes, we have genocides. It did not turn out like that. And so I talk about the lessons of the Holocaust. And perhaps we can talk 1 or 2 more years, and then we cannot do it anymore. None of us are capable to do that. And so the HRC is in the process of developing a new educational program, thanks to the Handel family, to prepare teachers and master teachers to teach the lessons of the Holocaust and human rights values. And hopefully we can teach it this generation, the next generation, the next generation, and the next generation. Well, I get the question, what can one person do? Look what is going on in the world. What can I do? I don't have the power to change the world. Yes, you do. You have the power of one. One person can make a difference. I always give the example of Rosa Parks. She did not start the civil rights movement, she ignited the civil rights movement. Oskar Schindler, up till this day, we don't know why he saved so many Jews, but he made a difference. Well, what if nobody listens to me? What then? I said, if nobody listens to you, you feel good about yourself that you talked about it, because you are a moral and ethical person. It is our duty as humans to talk about it. But you know what? You're never talking alone in the wilderness. People will follow you. People will listen to you. And eventually, more and more people will listen to you. So I talk to a lot of young people. And most of you, when you come in contact in the courts with young people, they have committed some kind of a crime, or you try to prove they have committed some kind of a crime. But I always tell everybody, young people nowadays, here in the United States, they are so great, and we never hear about them. We don't really read about them in the paper. We don't see it on the nightly news. They are so idealistic. They do more volunteer work than any other generation in the past, and they really want to change the world. So we have to keep on talking to them about the lessons of the Holocaust. You need 3 groups to have, quote unquote, a successful Holocaust or genocide. And these groups never change. You need the victims, who are most of the time a minority in their own country. They don't have the weapons, they don't have the means to fight back. You have the perpetrators, the ones who commit all these crimes. Personally, the perpetrators are more intriguing to me than any other group. How somebody can become a murderer, because nobody is born as a murderer. It is education that makes that person a murderer. If you get somebody in your court, a 15 or a 16-year-old, who committed a serious crime, and he comes from the ghetto, he has no background, no family structure, he too is educated within the gangs and his environment to become a murderer. It is a matter of education. So are the very good people are educated to be good. So it is a matter of education. So we have the victims, we have the perpetrators, We have the bystanders who would say, well, I have so much on my plate, my own life is so complicated, I don't want to bother. Just let me live, do my own thing. The bystanders, they make it possible for the perpetrators to commit all the crimes. They are even a more dangerous group than the perpetrators themselves. Then we have the rescuers. And I want to talk about the rescuers at the end of my little thing, because Drew Biter told me I have to tell the audience about certain rescuers. So let me tell you my story. Just one survivor who lived during the war in German-occupied Holland. Holland was always a very good country for Jewish people. They came from Spain and Portugal around 1450 because you had the Inquisition in Spain. And we were the only country that received Jewish people in those days as citizens. We were not put in a ghetto. As citizens, we had the same rights as the Dutch citizens. And there is a reason for it. Holland is an extremely small country, about the size of Delaware. We are very pragmatic. We travel all over the world to do business. Anybody who has money in his pocket, we love those people. Anybody can do trades. We are very pragmatic right away. They knew, these were good people from Spain and Portugal because they were extremely rich. And they built actually one of the largest Portuguese temples in Europe in about 1600. If you ever go to Amsterdam, it is a must to visit that temple. So the Jews had a good life in Holland. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, but we were protected by the law. We have a royal family, and they were kind of pro-Jewish. And so we had a good life. We really flourished, and that's why so many German Jews came in the Hitler period to Holland. They thought Holland would not be involved in the next war, like in the First World War. We were a neutral country. So it was a good country to live in. And we were very assimilated. And so Professor Barrett, who told a lot of stories that I really like to tell, he was talking about what was the definition of a Jew according to the Germans, if you had more than two Jewish grandparents. And they did not care if you never went to temple. It had nothing to do with religion. We were very assimilated, many mixed marriages. And it was not a common sight, but we saw it in Amsterdam that we had priests, Catholic priests, with a star. Because his parents, converted to, another religion. And he too was considered a Jew. He too was considered a Jew. So when the wars, before the war, let me tell you, because many Jewish people in Holland went the same route. My father was from Germany, and he came after the First World War. He came to Holland. He was a philatelist. He planned to work a couple of years on Holland, then pay for passages on the boat to go to America, where he had a brother living in Charleston, South Carolina. And in the meantime, he met my mother, got married, and he never went to America. My mother's family lived in Holland for more than 400 years, But my father was born and raised in Germany, and he always knew that Germany was extremely anti-Semitic. The government, people, the churches, very anti-Semitic, and he remembered all these stories. I also remembered that my father on Sundays, in those days you didn't have televisions and computers, there was less communication, and he listened often to when Hitler was speaking to one of these rallies he had on Sundays, and I was a little girl, and up to this day, I remember the voice of Hitler. I don't remember exactly what he said, of course, but the way he was a demagogue. I remember the voice of Hitler. I remember that. So very often when I hear some hate speech here in America, sometimes we have it here too, it reminds me of that voice, except Hitler spoke in German, and some groups speak in English here. And I know in our Constitution, you know, free speech, you can say whatever you like to, but keep in mind that hate speech can sometimes be more dangerous than a loaded gun. Keep that in mind. So we can no longer be bystanders. We have to be upstanders and talk out. And sometimes it is no crime not to be political correct. So when my father heard the speeches that we heard from the German Jews who fled to Holland, he knew that this time in the Second World War, the Germans would occupy Holland. And he tried to go to Australia as far away as possible. And so my mother and her family said, no way am I going all the way to Australia, because in those days, if you went to Australia, it was like going to the moon. And so no. Then when it was closer and closer, and after the Kristallnacht, my father tried to go to Switzerland. In those days, you had to have a huge bank account to be, you know, permitted to live in Switzerland. So that didn't work out. And then literally, when it got very close to 1940, he had a sister living in London, and he sold his business, and we gave up our apartment. There are no private homes in Amsterdam in those days. He registered me in a private school. And my mother said 1 week before we were supposed to leave, I ain't going. The Germans are not coming here. And then 1 week later, the Germans in May 1940 invaded Holland. We tried to go to the coast, the North Sea coast. There were fishing boats going to England. We could not do it. We could not do it. So that's how we ended up in Nazi-occupied territory. So the first 5-6 months, and the Germans did that everywhere in all the occupied countries except for Poland, they did not do too much. And there was a reason for it, why they did not want to rock the boat. Because they wanted, in that case, the Dutch population to feel comfortable with them. Oh, the Germans are not so bad, that occupation is not so bad, you know, until they started really talking business. So the first day when they entered Amsterdam, the German troops, my father was looking very carefully out of the window. He thought soldiers would come in the street and shoot us, you know. We had totally misconceptions about that. And indeed, not too much happened. And for some reason, we all knew, and don't ask me why, that the Germans would lose the war. We did not know it would take 5 years, but we knew they would lose the war. Then, after about 5 months, everything changed. There was a curfew after 8 o'clock, not only for Jews, for everybody. Nobody could go outside after 8 o'clock. Everybody got an identification card. If you were Jewish, there was a J stamped on it, so when they stopped you on the street, they could see you were a Jew. So in the very beginning, before they had the extermination camps, they only picked up young men, not the women, not the elderly, and they brought them to Germany, some to work in the war industry, some to Buchenwald and Dachau, but they picked up the young men only. Then you had to wear a star, and you had to pay for the star. You had to pay for the star, and also there's a ration card for textile, and it was yellow. And then nobody knew why it was yellow. And I learned about 20 years ago why they used the color yellow, because that's the color that is the most visible at nighttime. And on it said Jood, that means Jew, on the left side, and you had to sew it on, so you couldn't just take it off. And then it all started. Then You couldn't have a civil service job anymore. They fired everybody at a civil service job. You couldn't go to public schools anymore. I went to public schools. You had to go to some designated schools, Jewish schools, where they put all the Jews in the worst part of Amsterdam. You couldn't go to the library, you couldn't go to parks as a child, you couldn't go to the movies, to concerts. You could not do anything. You could not shop. You only could shop between 3 and 5 in Jewish stores. Otherwise, you could not shop. You couldn't go to non-Jewish doctors, non-Jewish hospitals. You could not do anything. Everybody had to hand in the radios, Jews as well as non-Jews, so you wouldn't listen to the BBC in London, so you wouldn't get the news. We only had one newspaper that the Germans printed, and of course everything was colored by the German philosophy and politics. So we couldn't do too much, so we were totally isolated. Just, you cannot imagine it, living in a world where you don't have a cell phone, where you don't have a computer, where you don't have a television, where you don't have a newspaper. We were totally isolated. So in the very beginning, when they did not have the capacity of the extermination camp, because 6,000 people a day, you saw all the pictures in the eastern part of Europe, the Jews had to dig their own mass graves, and they shot them one by one. The elderly, the young, the disabled, the babies, everybody. They killed everybody. The Germans are very efficient. They like to do everything in an efficient way up to this day. So that was a messy business. If you shoot people one by one, you get blood on your clothes. Many of them speak your own language, like German. You have children. But then, they did it for a long time. And they were kind of proud of it, what they were doing. How do we know? We have the letters and the postcards that they sent to the relatives in Germany, and they told them what they were doing. They felt good about it. What most people don't know is that they could refuse to do it. There was no penalty. They would not shoot them. They would them sent back to their hometown. There was no penalty. A few refused to do it after a while. Most didn't, and I don't have the time to go into it, to explain it. If you ever want to know more about it, you read the book by Christopher Browning, one of the foremost Holocaust writers, and he wrote Ordinary People, Hamburg, Police 5th Battalion. It is a fascinating book where people do that. So then, in 1942, they opened the gas chambers in Auschwitz, Sobibor, Birkenau. And then the whole thing started changing. Oh, also, one thing that Professor Barrett talked about, the Jews were deprived of making a living. One day, a doorbell rang, and there were some Germans there with the Dutch police, because percentage-wise, more Jews got killed in Holland than any other Western country, and there was a reason for it. First, we couldn't escape that much because the hinterland is Germany, and there was the North Sea, and in Belgium, they had the German occupation, so that was very hard. But also, the Dutch police cooperated with the Germans. Not necessarily that they wanted to, but they wanted to follow orders. In Belgium, for example, many less Jews got killed because the Belgian civil police, they said, this is not in our job description to arrest children and women and innocent citizens. So they rang the doorbell, and my father had a kind of a business that he could do from his home. He was selling stamps to stamp collectors. And so they took all this, you know, they took everything away. Of course, my father didn't have everything in his house. He was hiding something with non-Jewish families. They went to 32 stamp dealers that day. 32. They lived all over Holland at the same time. So one could not call the other. 32. How do they know that there were 32 there and living all over Holland? Through the IBM system. I cannot elaborate on that. It's through the IBM system. They even took my piggy bank with about a guilder in it. And I was so little then, I got so upset, and my father said, don't worry about it. We put the money back in, you know, the 1 guilder. So we couldn't make a living. So in 42, when they had capacity to kill so many people, then after 8 o'clock, because it was a curfew, after 8 o'clock, they rang the doorbells. I knew exactly where the Jews were living, and they took the people, and they put them in German army trucks, and brought them to a theater in Amsterdam. There was a theater in Amsterdam in a kind of Jewish neighborhood, and it was a theater not for movies, but presenting plays. They took all the seats out of the auditorium, and they put everybody there. It depended on the circumstances. You could stay there 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days or longer. Then in front of the theater, everything was kind of primitive. There was a streetcar stop. They put the Jews in a streetcar, brought them to the railroad station in Amsterdam, and from there a train was leaving to Westerbork. There was a transition camp on the Dutch and German border, and from there, once a week, a train was leaving, a cattle train was leaving. On the outside was a plaque that said Westerbork, Auschwitz, Auschwitz, Westerbork, and sometimes a couple of thousand people they put in these trains, and people had to stand up. They couldn't sit down. There were no facilities. There was no food. There was no water. Once a week. So we were also picked up and brought to that theater, but it was in the very, very beginning. And so my father bribed people there and said, you know, can we go back to our apartment? Oh yes, they said. He gave them money, of course, and we got a kind of a permit, a piece of paper about the size of this, and that says we were indispensable for the German army, whatever that meant. But anyway, they gave my father a couple of days to find a family to help us hide, okay? So, my story is very similar to that of Anne Frank, and most of you know her story. What do I want to say? Oh, a lot of people ask me, how come the Jews just let it happen? The Jews just, how come they did not fight back and shoot the Germans? Especially younger people. You know, if you don't like something, you shoot somebody, right? Well, we didn't have the weapons, we couldn't do that. If you really would hurt a German, they would kill your whole family, and sometimes even the bystanders. So, why didn't more people then go into hiding? I'll tell you why. You needed 3 conditions to go into hiding. Number 1, you needed a certain amount of money, especially if you live in a city like Amsterdam. You had to pay the host family to hide you. Secondly, we were so much isolated from the non-Jewish population. We couldn't have visitors anymore. We were non-Jewish. We could not talk to them. They could not come to us. It was very hard to find a family. Thirdly, you had to fit a certain profile. You couldn't be too old. You couldn't be too young. You couldn't be pregnant. You might need a doctor or a hospital. That was not available. You couldn't look too Jewish. In case they rang the doorbell, they wouldn't see you were Jewish, because before the war, we were rather homogeneous. Most people were kind of blonde and blue eyes. Not anymore, but then it was different. So it was very hard. And Frank was in that annex for 2 years and 3 months with her family and some other people. 8 people were in the annex. But that was an exception. Her story is also unique. Very few pairs were in the same place, were hiding the same place as their children. I would say about 90% were not with the children. It was easier to find a hiding place for a child than it was for the parents. So we were separate. Most of us were separated. She was in that hiding place. She had the support of her parents and her sister, although she was always arguing, but she had the support of her family. Her father was teaching her. And the most unique thing, if you ever hear about the diary of Anne Frank, is that she could write the diary. If you went into hiding, you were not allowed to put anything in writing. If you went into hiding, you got a counterfeit identification card. You were always born in Indonesia, but because it was a Dutch colony, they could not check that. And of course, there was no J on the counterfeit one, and you got a different name or a Christian-sounded name. So they were in that one place, and he let her write the diary. You were not allowed to write anything. And I always thought that after Frank fought, that was such a perfect hiding place during the war, in that annex, or in that canal house, they would never find them. And about also 20 years ago, I saw an old documentary where they interviewed Otto Frank, and indeed, they thought it was such a good hiding place, and it was. They were betrayed, and it was. And of course, her story is different than mine because I'm sitting here, and she isn't. The other nice thing, unique thing about the diary is I have both editions, the original editions and the final edition in Dutch on purpose, because Anne Frank was so young. She was 12 when she started writing it, was an unbelievable good writer. If you did not know it was Anne Frank, you would have thought a 30-year-old woman who wrote the diary. It was unbelievable, well written. She was in that one place for 1 year and 3 months. But normally you moved from one place to another because you were always in hiding in the oldest part of Amsterdam. 300-year-old apartments. And take my word for it, if you walk in those apartments, all floors creak. So if the host family was not home and the neighbors heard something, or toilet flushing, or the boards creaking, they knew there was somebody there, and it might be some Jews. Some people let it go. Or some people perhaps thought that it's great that they were hiding Jews. A lot of them didn't. They went to the police, and they said, I think they have Jewish people there. And why did they go to the police? First, they might have been anti-Semitic. Even more important, they got money or food to betray people. And food was even more valuable than money, because we only could buy food on the black market. So if you thought that somebody was, suspicious, you had to go from one address to another. I had about 11 addresses, so did my parents. And in the very end, I was also betrayed. I knew who did it, but by the very end, there were no more trains running to Poland because the Allied troops already invaded Europe. So, and they bombed the railroad tracks, so there were no more trains running. Anne Frank was on the last train to Auschwitz on September 1944. Only her father came back from out of everybody who lived in the annex. So I was brought, the theater in Amsterdam was already closed. I was brought to Westerbork. And then at the very end of the war, they took the healthiest one of us and put us in trucks, partly by train and partly walking, to factories in Western Germany because they needed people to work there for the war industry. The men were fighting on the front, but they were all bombed out, so they brought us to Bergen-Belsen. So that is a very short, that is my story. We were liberated in April by the English Army in 1945. So I talk to young, especially young people. I want them to be upstanders. Whatever happened on this side of the world, we will know 1 minute from now in our living room. And 9/11, a lot of Americans were surprised by 9/11. What did we do to the world to deserve that? If we are not very careful, we will get it again. We can no longer be any bystanders, we have to be upstanders. Now I want to talk about the rescuers, because my time is running out, I think. Where are you, Drew? Wherever you are? 5 minutes. The rescuers. I will end with my famous last lines. The most difficult country where you could go into hiding was Poland. It was a very anti-Semitic country in the first place. It was extremely, extremely difficult. Besides, they had the largest Jewish population. More Jews lived in Poland than any other country in Europe. But some Jews found hiding places, most of the time in rural areas, and most of the time with very poor farmers who hardly had anything themselves to eat, because whatever they were growing, the Germans took it. And many times they were hiding in stables, in caves, you know, but they took it into hiding. Extremely difficult. If the neighbors would find out, they would kill them. Okay? So after the war, they visited those families who were hiding the Jews in Poland. And the interviewers had a preconceived idea. If they would ask, why did you do it? It was so dangerous. They would kill not only the Jews, they would kill your whole family. They would say, we are Christians, good Christians. We believe in God. And Jesus Christ told us to do that. That is what they expected. So when they interviewed these people, why did you do that? They shrugged their shoulders. We don't know. But we felt that the Jews were even worse off than we were, and we had to help them. No words about religion. These same people, interviewers, went back to the same families. And they found out after many interviews why they did it. They fit a certain profile. These people were raised in a community among family members who took care of their neighbors. If a neighbor was sick, they would take the children and watch the children. They were looking out for the people in their community. They were caregivers. They didn't teach their children to be good to other people, be caregivers. These children were born in those families. They saw it, they observed it, they internalized it probably. So when somebody was sick, for example, they brought over the chicken soup. You know, that was the Jewish penicillin. So they brought over the chicken soup. So now when I talk, especially to high schoolers and to people, I say, you live in a global world now. Everybody is your neighbor. People in Rwanda, Somalia, and Turkey, and Syria, and whatever. Everybody is your neighbor. When you hear something that is not right, when you hear something is not right, you are going around with your chicken soup, no matter where they live. And you bring the chicken soup, because that is your neighbor. So all of us should be you know, bring the chicken soup. If you can cook, I cannot. Bring the chicken soup and take care of your neighbors. And your children will see it and they will follow you. And that, Drew Biter, is the end of my spiel. After the war, nobody talked about the Holocaust. Not the Jews, not the Gentiles. Nobody talked about it till they arrested Eichmann in Argentina in the 60s. Nobody talked. I was married in Holland, Jewish guy, also a survivor. That was one taboo topic. We did not talk about it. The non-Jews didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to hear about it. They said we had a bad time too, you were not the only victims. And we felt kind, in a certain way, guilty that we are the ones who survived and not our relatives. And we did not want to talk about it because nobody wanted to hear a story. With Eichmann, that all came out in the open. We started writing books about it, plays about it, dramas on television. And so we wanted to change the world. And we did. And did I regret it? No, I did not regret it. It was the best time of my life. Because when we were young, just to remember that you thought that you alone could change the world. It's like getting drunk on alcohol. You know, you feel so good that you could do that. And as I told you, you will never leave that. We never said, what can you do for us? So each of us have to prepare the world so when we leave it, it will be a little bit better than for the generation that comes after us.